Thanks so much, Sophie and Richard. It's a fascinating presentation and some trenchant views from Richard as always. And I'm also delighted to see that people are posting lots and lots of questions and comments in the chat box. So please do keep that coming if you want to. Before we start to pick up the questions and comments that people have made, I just want to let you know, or remind you, or let you know if you join perhaps a little later, that we have been recording this. It will be edited and posted on the Learning Live website, along with the slide presentation, and therefore that means that things like the references that people have been asking for in the chat will be there available for you, and we'll also write to you as a participant in this webinar, and all the people who registered who perhaps couldn't come today, so that you also have those. I can see people saying, that there's that they'd like those links, and perhaps, although we've been sharing things in the chat, that people are multitasking and so can't necessarily get to them right now. So we will let you have that information. Yeah. Right. Okay. So I'll try and pick up some of the questions that people have been answering. Thank you so much for submitting them. Here's a very practical, straightforward one, Sophie and Richard. Is there an easily downloadable version version of the grip and the grip 2 forms? People have said that they struggle to find a downloadable version. That's a very practical and easy question. I hope so. Can I hand that over?
Yes, and I think I guess because we have the 5 items, people have tended to use the original BMJ, or research involvement and engagement list of items, and have reported them within their own paper. So I guess because we've ended up with short form being the predominant mode of reporting, it's been, people have sort of made their own in a way. There is no reason why we couldn't create something which reports both the short form and the long form. But I think because it's only been 5 items, we've not necessarily made, and we don't really have a home as an internet sort of home for grip 2 in the same way as other guidance. But we could produce that if people found that helpful.
Thanks, Sophie. That's really good. And I'm just trying to pick up some practical, factual questions for a start to clarify. Ilana has asked, with regards to the checklist, how much of it is a yes/no checklist? How much of it is kind of a narrative questions? Yeah, I don't know if you can answer that.
So I don't think there's any yes/no. I think it's very much a narrative checklist that really enables you to report the things of importance about your own study. So that hence the sort of trying to keep it broad. So things like aims will depend on what you're doing, and the methods will depend on what you're doing. But it's more of a signal to the community to tell us about these really critical elements of reporting. So very much the narrative is down to you and what feels right for the study you're doing.
Thank you.
I think too, the idea of narrative, I would hope looking forward that the narrative allows patient representatives to tell their stories, which is something that most of us are pretty good at doing and get quite used to doing, although usually it's about our health rather than our involvement. I think the problem with patient involvement, if you accept that good patient involvement is a process, it's a conversation throughout the course of a research study, may or may not be actually with the same patient representatives throughout, but nevertheless, it is a conversation and a process. And it's really hard to ask yes/no questions beyond, do you think you had any influence in the project, yes or no?
Thanks, Richard. Thank you. Great. So I'll try and pick up some more of the questions. They're coming in thick and fast, which is great. We've only got a short time to answer them. We'll see if we can get through these as quickly as we can. Georgia Chisnell asked about, I was interested in a comment that you made, Sophie, about negative outcomes from patient and public involvement as picked up by the GRIP process, and wondered if you had got a bit more to say about that. You know, has that been things like people withdrawing from PPI or tensions in the process? And also, what's the difference between negative outcomes and results and discussion?
Negative outcomes results in discussion.
Yeah.
Okay. So just picking up on that first bit, I think the negative impacts, it could be a variety of different things. It could be methods or approaches that people haven't found helpful. So at this present point in time, when a lot of our public involvement is virtual, you can imagine people being able to feed back on what's helpful and unhelpful about virtual interaction and what limited potential impacts. It could be working in a context where, while the project is well supported, perhaps the wider context within a university isn't in terms of public involvement. So people have problems with, standard things like expenses or, practical challenges. It could be that in some areas where we do less public involvement and they're often more hidden and complex, it can be really difficult for public contributors to make an impact because there's not enough information coming from the research team about a concept or a method, and there isn't enough time to explain it. And so being able to, and it is difficult, being able to reflect and be honest about that at the end of a project can be like gold dust to the next one, because they know where to start and they know not what to do that's going to be unhelpful for people. So I think the negative side can be really important. And many years ago, myself and Andy Gibson and Carol Mockford and others wrote a chapter all about negative impacts of public involvement. So if people are interested, I can dig up the reference for that. But it is trying to make sure we report both the positive impacts and the things that work well and the things that didn't work so well as part of that broader picture, and giving us a complete sense of things. But Richard, what was the second part? Sorry, I didn't completely get that.
So thank you. I'm going to find that question.
Don't worry.
Can I just butt in? Can I butt in? Because this is a really
please.
researcher answer, and it was a researcher question going down into great detail. But it does highlight one of the challenges for any patients getting involved in this kind of stuff, because actually words like results mean different things to researchers than they do to patients. For me, the result of a study is, did it show the new drug worked or not? We use words like that. Did it work? Is it effective? And did it cure more people? That's the kind of stuff that we get involved to actually do health research, to make for better treatments, better care for people who are going through often what we have already been through ourselves. Not always. Sometimes it's someone we loved. Sometimes it is genuine altruism and interest. But most of us get involved with research because we've got a health problem and we want better treatments for other people who have that health problem. So the reporting of our influence actually needs to be in those terms. And when we see things that have words like negative results, outcomes, we immediately think of the research study rather than evaluating our input. And most of us don't use the word input either.
Thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think Georgie was asking, I think some questions about, what were the kinds of negative things that people had identified, in the GRIP process, that shed light on the way that that research was being carried out with patients. I think it's like that. I think that was the thrust of the question. Yeah.
And it was a very, as a patient, very good question. And Sophie did give some really good triggers.
Yeah.
But things like us having problems claiming expenses because some university is not designed to give money to volunteers, which many of them aren't. That's on the one hand. That's a really irritating thing, but it wouldn't necessarily affect what we think we've added to the research study. And that's why I think patients may need a separate thing. about our contribution to the research study and the challenges we had just turning up to meetings, or indeed making a contribution ourselves. You know, those of us who don't have connections to IT, those of us who can't travel freely, those of us who have problems with our voices. You know, there are all sorts of different things that we might want to report.
Thank you, Richard. We've got 3 minutes left. There's a question here about how, several questions really about how you would use the GRIP form and the kind of GRIP process. At what stage in the research that you're involved in would you use that form? For example, would you just keep that to the end and then look back, or would you, kind of use it at the beginning as a way of starting an evaluation and reporting process, right from the start, being clear about that? Have you got any thoughts and examples about how people have used that?
Yeah, and I think that can be flexible. So the traditional research approach is probably to report at the end, as we often do. But GRIP is flexible enough that you can use it to start planning your work, and that's often when I work with our students and postdocs. We're often encouraging them to think about the items in GRIP to help guide their planning. And so that when the reporting, is requested at the end, it isn't a surprise. It's already built into the project. And I think that can also then help guide what you capture about the process and how you ask people to report on their experiences and how you do that evaluative bit as well. So, GRIP is as well as a reporting guide, it is a bit of a nudge to the community to think about this at the start, so that this is already in progress. And I haven't come across people who've used it intermittently in a study, but there's no reason why you can't. And the way I tend to use it is I build it up. So a study will start and we'll start completing it. And as the study progresses, we add to it, so that by the end, it's been a very natural process of completion.
Thank you very much. Right, we've got just 1 minute left. One last question, and then I'll sum up. A number of people have pointed out that the proliferation of tools and frameworks, PROMS, Spirit Pro, PEAT, PPEET, STARDIT, and so on. Have you got any thoughts about the range of tools and frameworks that there are out there? How does that all work together? Does it all work together?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'm not sure we've given enough thought to how it all works together and how we can help our community to bring all of those elements into one place, because sometimes we do work quite separately. So I think there's probably something to be said for joining the community to think how we can support sort of integrated use of some of these things. And I think unless you're in the area working with them, it's very hard to see that. So I think that's a really important point, and we do need to think about that.